I have been inside 431 weddings, not as a guest, not as family, as the person standing just outside the frame of every photograph, holding a clipboard and a radio, watching a $45,000 event unfold the way a conductor watches an orchestra, aware of every instrument, every timing error, every moment where something is about to go wrong before anyone else in the room has the first idea. My name is Claire Natalie Ostrowski. I am 31 years old. I am the Regional Operations Director for Harlow Collective, a hospitality and event catering company that serves 14 venues across the Mid-Atlantic. I manage 6 full-time coordinators, a rotating roster of 43 contract staff, and vendor relationships that took me 7 years to build. I have renegotiated catering contracts for venues that did not know they were being overcharged. I have spotted a health code issue from across a ballroom before a single inspector walked through the door. I can read a room the way other people read a text message, quickly, completely, and without missing anything between the lines. I know how a wedding works, not the romantic version, the operational version. I know what the florals cost before the invoice is printed. I know which vendors give kickbacks and which ones deliver what they promise. I know how a tip jar gets collected, how a gift table gets managed, how a honeymoon fund gets transferred, and I know exactly which clauses in a venue contract give the event coordinator, not the family, final authorization over fund disbursement. I know all of this because it is my job. My family knew I worked in food service. That was the version they told people. When Brianna got engaged to Gary Hale in October, my mother Sandra called me on a Tuesday evening to tell me the news. She said it the way she said most things to me, with a warmth that arrived just after the relevant information, like seasoning added after a dish has already gone cold. "Your sister is getting married," she said. "June 14th. We're having it at Thornwood Estate." I knew Thornwood Estate. I had coordinated 3 events there in the past 18 months. I knew their head florist, their venue manager, their kitchen staff, and the specific clause in their standard contract about authorized payment signatories. I knew their catering was overpriced by roughly 22% for families who came in without industry connections. "That's a beautiful venue," I said. "We're hoping you'll be there," my mother said, and then, with no pause at all, "And we were hoping you might be able to help with some of the vendor coordination, since you work in that world." I wrote one word in my navy blue moleskine notebook, the small one I keep in the inside pocket of every blazer I own, the one I have carried since my first week as a junior coordinator at 23. The word was careful. I said I would think about it. I drove home that night in the particular silence that comes when you understand exactly what someone is asking and exactly why they chose not to say it plainly. Here is what helping had looked like for the previous 4 years. In March of 2021, my father Dennis called me to say my parents were behind on a property tax bill. The amount was $2,100. I sent it that week through Zelle, labeled as a loan, which was the polite fiction we used at that time. It was never mentioned again, which is how I learned it had never been a loan. In August of 2021, my mother called to say Brianna needed help with first and last month's rent for a new apartment. The amount was $1,900. I sent it. Brianna texted me a single heart emoji. In February of 2022, my father called to say there was a furnace situation. $3,400. I sent it. No one asked about my furnace. No one asked about my apartment. No one asked what my month looked like. In November of 2022, the request was the largest. My parents were refinancing and needed a short-term gap covered. The amount was $7,100. I sent it in 2 transfers. My mother called to thank me and mentioned, in the same breath, that Brianna had just been promoted at her marketing job and was really coming into her own. Total, across 4 years, $14,500 sent, 0 returned, 0 discussed, 0 acknowledged as anything other than the expected behavior of the family member who was good with money. And then the request arrived that I could not fulfill. It was April of 2023. My parents had found a lake house property they wanted to purchase as an investment. They needed $18,000 to cover the gap between their financing and the asking price. They told me they would pay me back in 18 months. They told me it was a family investment. My father told me it was time for me to really invest in the family. I had $18,000. I had worked for 7 years to build it. I had a plan for it that had nothing to do with my parents' lake house. I said no. The silence that followed lasted 11 months. Not silence from everyone. Brianna texted me once, 4 days after the no, to say, "Mom is devastated. Did you really say no to helping them?" My father did not call. My mother sent one email that was 3 sentences long and contained the phrase, "We raised you better than this," which I read twice and then filed under a folder I labeled Keep. No one from my family called on my birthday that November. No one called at Christmas. No one called in February when I was promoted to regional director. 11 months of silence is a very clarifying experience. You learn exactly what the warmth was made of. You learn that some relationships are financial instruments wearing the costume of love. You learn to recognize the difference, not bitterly, just accurately, the way you learn to recognize a vendor who pads their invoices. When my mother called in October about the wedding, those 11 months were sitting in the room with me, quiet and very clear. My colleague Dana, who has known me for 5 years and has watched me renegotiate 3 vendor contracts from across a conference table with the composure of someone ordering a sandwich, told me not to go. "You know it's a setup," she said. She was not being dramatic. She was reading the situation the way I had trained her to read a room. "I know," I said. "Then why are you going?" I thought about that question for a long time before I answered it honestly. I was not going because I thought things would be different. I was not going out of hope, which is what most people would assume. Hope had left the building 11 months ago and had not requested re-entry. I was not going because I wanted to prove something or perform something or reclaim anything. I was going because of a specific morning in 2009. I was 16. It was a Saturday in late October, and my mother had gotten up early to make the particular kind of French toast that requires challah bread and a very specific amount of vanilla. And she had set the kitchen table with the good placemats, the yellow ones. And when I came downstairs, she handed me a mug of coffee that she had made exactly the way I liked it before I had ever told her how I liked it. Because she had simply noticed. She did not say anything momentous. She asked me how my project was going. She listened to the whole answer. She refilled my coffee without being asked. That version of my mother existed. I had not invented her. She lived in that kitchen on that morning as completely as anything I have ever witnessed. That is the version I was going to grieve, in real time, by walking into Thornwood Estate on June 14th and watching what it had been replaced with. I opened my Moleskine the night before and I wrote one line, "You are going to observe. You are not going to rescue." I underlined it twice. I put the notebook in the inside pocket of my blazer, a charcoal theory blazer I had bought myself when I got the promotion, and I went asleep. Thornwood Estate sits at the end of a quarter-mile private drive lined with white oak trees that the venue uses in every promotional photo they publish. I have driven that road in a catering van at 6 in the morning. I have driven it at midnight after a gala that ran 2 hours over schedule. I know exactly how the gravel sounds under tires, and I know exactly where the lighting ends and the dark begins. On June 14th, I drove it as a guest. I counted 7 cars in the lot that I recognized as belonging to extended family members who had not reached out to me in 11 months. I identified the florist's van, Marcus Webb Florals, dark green, the side panel freshly detailed, and felt the small, specific comfort of knowing there was at least one professional in the building. I had done my work before I arrived. 3 weeks earlier, when my mother called to ask if I could look at the vendor list, as a favor, I had done considerably more than look at it. I had called Thornwood's event manager, a woman named Patricia Chu whom I had worked with on 2 corporate galas, and I had reviewed the contract. When I saw that the catering package was the standard unmarked rate, the one they charge families who don't know to ask, I made one call to my distributor contact and arranged the industry rate instead. The savings to my family, $22,000. I did not tell them. I put my name on the contract as co-signatory, which Patricia noted, and which was completely standard given my role as the coordinating professional, and I said nothing about it at dinner or on any phone call because no one asked. I walked into Thornwood Estate at 4:47 p.m. The main hall smelled of the lilies Marcus had used in the centerpieces, white Casablancas, very elegant, very expensive, and perfectly matched to the color palette I had sent him in a 7-page specification document 3 weeks prior. The lighting was warm and directional, the way good event lighting always is. It makes everyone look slightly better than they are, which is the architecture of a well-run evening. My mother saw me from across the room. The warmth arrived first, and then, behind it, like the second ingredient in a recipe, came something that reorganized itself too quickly for most people to notice. She crossed the room and hugged me with both arms and said, "You look wonderful." And I believed she meant it, and I also understood that the compliment was structural, the first brick in a wall she was building. "Thanks for the floral notes, by the way," she said. "They turned out beautifully." "Marcus does good work," I said. She introduced me to 3 relatives I vaguely remembered. Her hand was on my arm the entire time. My father Dennis came over and shook my hand, my father, who shakes hands instead of hugging, who has done this since I was approximately 14, and he said, "Glad you could make it, Claire Bear," which was the nickname from a decade earlier that he still used when he wanted something to feel warmer than it was. I smiled. I put my hand in my blazer pocket and touched the spine of my moleskine. The room was set for 84 guests. I counted the place settings. I found my seat. The cocktail hour was 37 minutes long, which is slightly shorter than standard, and suggests either a budget constraint on bar service or a specific desire to move guests to seated positions quickly. I noted this the way I note most things, quietly, neutrally, the way you note a temperature reading. I was standing near the floral display table when Marcus Webb appeared from the hallway that connects to the service corridor. He was still wearing his dark green apron, which he hadn't had time to remove, and his silver hair was slightly damp at the temples from whatever the kitchen area had been doing to the humidity. He looked at the centerpiece, made one almost invisible adjustment to a stem, and then looked up and found me watching him. "You're the one who sent the arrangement specifications," he said. It was not a question. "I am," I said. "Those were the best notes I've ever received from a client's family member." He said it simply, the way a craftsman states a fact. Then he looked at the centerpiece again and nodded once, satisfied, and went back the way he came. I stood there for a moment. I thought, so someone in this building knows exactly who I am. The dinner seating began at 6:14. I was placed at a table with my Aunt Roxanne, her husband Paul, 2 of Gary's cousins, and a college friend of Brianna's named Amber, who spent the first 20 minutes of the meal taking photographs of her food for reasons that had nothing to do with hunger. My parents were at the head table, which is standard. Brianna was radiant, which was real. Gary was charming, which I have no evidence to dispute. The speeches were warm and specific and occasionally funny, and I felt, during all of it, the strange ache of watching something beautiful that you have a complicated relationship with. A wedding is still a wedding, even when you are grieving something at the same table. And then, between the salad course and the entree, my father stood up to give what was apparently an unscheduled addition to the toast sequence. He was the kind of man who speaks in the warm, carrying voice of someone who has never once doubted that the room wants to hear him. He thanked Gary's family. He talked about Brianna, her drive, her creativity, her warmth. He said she had always been the one who made them proud in ways they could point to. I watched my mother's face. She was looking at her water glass. Then my father said, "And we have all our family here tonight, well, almost all. Claire's here too." And he gestured at my table with a smile that was entirely performative. "Our other daughter, who is still figuring things out, God bless her." He said it lightly. He said it with a laugh. 16 people at the tables nearest to me heard it. 3 of them looked at me. I put my fork down. I picked it back up. I smiled at the 3 people who were looking at me, and my smile was professionally calibrated, and none of them could read a single thing in it. But I reached into my blazer pocket, and I opened my moleskine to a blank page, and I wrote the time. 6:31 p.m. Then Gary said something to redirect the toast, and Brianna looked briefly in my direction with an expression that managed to be apologetic and unbothered at the same time, which is a specific kind of communication that requires years of practice. My Aunt Roxanne leaned toward me and said softly, "You know how he is." "I do," I said. My mother's hand rested on the white tablecloth, and I watched her index finger move once in a small circular motion, the tell she has always had when she is waiting for a moment to pass. I noted that too. Over the next 40 minutes, 4 separate relatives approached me with versions of the same sentence. "So what are you doing these days?" Each one was delivered with the exact inflection that means. Whatever it is, we assume it is less than what Brianna is doing. I answered each one the same way, warmly, briefly, without offering enough information to be interesting, which is a skill I learned from vendor negotiations. Then Gary came by the table and said, clapping a hand on the back of my chair, "Claire, you should tell people about your, what is it, you do catering stuff, right? Like catering." And then he laughed in the way that makes a diminishment feel like an affectionate joke. "Something like that," I said. He moved on. I looked at my water glass. I thought about Marcus Webb's apron and his careful adjustment to a floral stem, and the fact that he had identified me in 30 seconds based only on the quality of a document I had sent. I thought, someone in this building knows exactly what I am. I excused myself at 3 p.m., between the entree and the dessert service, with the stated purpose of checking on the dietary accommodation that had been flagged for one of Gary's cousins. A legitimate concern, since I had noticed the kitchen sending out a dish that may have cross-contacted with shellfish. And in my professional opinion, it was worth a quiet word with the catering staff. I walked the corridor that guests do not usually take, the one that runs along the east side of the building, parallel to the main hall, and connects to the service entrance near the bridal suite. The bridal suite door was 3 inches open. I was not looking for anything. I want to be precise about that. I have replicated events in my mind many times since June 14th, and I can confirm with complete accuracy that I was walking past that door on my way to the kitchen, and I heard my mother's voice, and I slowed down because I heard my name. She was on the phone. I heard her clearly. She was reading aloud. She said, "And Gary already confirmed he'll handle the envelope collection, so just make sure Claire doesn't end up anywhere near the gift table tonight. Dennis is going to do the handoff, directly, to the account Gary set up." A pause. Then, "She doesn't know she's on the contract. We asked Patricia not to mention it because then she'd start asking questions about the disbursement," and another pause. Then my mother laughed, the specific laugh she uses when she is comfortable, the one from the kitchen in 2009, the one I recognized immediately, used now for an entirely different purpose. I stood in the corridor for 4 more seconds. I heard enough. I continued to the kitchen. I spoke to the sous chef about the shellfish concern. He thanked me and pulled the dish. I washed my hands at the service sink, and I looked at myself in the small mirror mounted above it, and I was aware of a complete absence of surprise, which is itself a kind of information, the kind that tells you that part of you already knew. My pulse was what it always is when I am working. My hands were dry before I reached for the paper towel. I made my decision in the time it took to dry my hands. I was not angry. I was done. If you have ever been in a room full of people who love you for what you provide and not for what you are, if you have ever smiled through a dinner while running threat assessment, hit subscribe. You will want to see how this one lands. I walked back to the main hall with the same expression I wear when a health inspector arrives during a Saturday evening service, which is to say, entirely neutral and completely informed. I found Patricia Chu near the event manager's station by the north entrance. She was holding a tablet and a pen, and she looked up when she saw me coming the way professionals recognize each other from across a room, by posture, by pace, by the specific way a person moves when they know exactly where they are going. I said, "Patricia, the disbursement sequence for tonight's vendor reconciliation, that still runs through the contract signatory, correct?" She said, "Correct, standard clause. You're listed as co-auth on the Harlow Writer." I said, "I'll need you to hold the gift fund transfer pending my authorization. Don't release anything to an external account without my sign-off." She looked at me for one moment, then she said, "Understood, done." That was the entire conversation. On my way back to my table, I passed Marcus Webb in the coat room hallway. He was gathering his tools to leave for the evening. I stopped. "The Casablancas are perfect," I said. "Thank you for executing on those notes." He looked up. He said, "Thank you for writing them." I pulled a business card from my inside pocket. The one with my direct line, the one I give to vendors I want to work with again, and I handed it to him. He read it. He read my title. He looked up at me once more, with an expression of quiet, complete recognition. I went back to my table. I sat down. I waited. This is the part of the evening that I return to most often when I think about June 14th. The dessert service had begun. The cake had been cut, and there was a dessert bar along the east wall, miniature tarts, macarons, a chocolate fountain that I could have told them was a logistical choice they would regret. But no one had asked. I sat at my table, and I ate a lemon tart, and I watched my family. My father was holding court at the head table, loose and expansive, the way men like him get when an event is going according to plan. He had refilled his wine twice. He was telling a story with his hands. My mother was watching the room with the careful attention of a woman who has spent her entire adult life managing other people's perceptions of her family. She was doing it well. She always did it well. Brianna was dancing with Gary in the small space in front of the DJ setup, and she was genuinely happy. I could tell the difference, and that was real, and I held it separately from everything else, the way you keep a good ingredient in a separate bowl. Gary was laughing at something at the head table. None of them knew that the sequence they had planned, the envelope collection, the gift card pile, the cash that my father's brother-in-law had collected in a small velvet bag near the entrance, the honeymoon fund transfer that was supposed to flow to the account Gary had set up. None of it could move without my signature. I thought about the version of me that would have discovered that group chat and cried in a bathroom stall. She was 23. She had been worth more than what she was told she was worth, and it had taken her 8 years to fully believe it. I thought about what she would think of sitting at this table, eating a lemon tart, watching a system work exactly as designed. I thought she would be surprised, and then I thought she would not be surprised at all. I looked at Brianna dancing with Gary, and I felt the particular grief of someone who is not sure whether they are losing something or releasing it. Both feelings can occupy the same body at the same time. I have learned this. The dessert service ran 18 minutes. I ate my tart. I waited. If you are the person in your family who is expected to stay calm while the table is rearranged around you, drop a comment. I read everyone. At 8:42 p.m., the DJ announced the final dance. My father stood and excused himself from the head table. He moved toward Gary with a purposeful energy, the energy of a man who has a next step and knows it. I watched him say something in Gary's ear. Gary nodded. They moved together toward the gift table. My Aunt Roxanne's husband Paul had the velvet bag. Gary's cousin had a small envelope stack. My father took the bag with both hands and the ease of a man who expects the transaction to be simple. He handed it to Gary. Gary took out his phone. I watched Gary's face change. He tried the transfer once. Then he looked at his phone with the slight frown of a man who assumes the problem is his signal. He moved 2 steps to the left, which is what people do when they think the problem is geography. He tried again. The frown deepened. He said something to my father. My father took the phone. He looked at it with the particular incomprehension of a man who has never once been blocked by a system he believed he controlled. He handed the phone back to Gary. Gary said something to Gary's cousin, who came over and looked at the phone and shrugged. My father walked to find Patricia Chu. I watched him find her by the event manager's station. I watched him speak. I watched Patricia listen, nod once, and then say something that lasted approximately 4 seconds. My father's face did not collapse. Men like my father do not collapse in rooms where people can see them. But something in his posture changed, a specific recalibration, the kind that happens when a plan meets an obstacle it did not account for. He looked across the room. He found me. I was seated at my table, hands folded in my lap, my blazer on, my moleskine in my pocket. I looked back at him calmly. His expression moved through several rooms in about 3 seconds: confusion, recalculation, and then, behind those, the beginning of understanding. Not the full understanding, just the first door of it opening. He walked toward me. My father sat down in the empty chair across from me. He set his hands on the table. He was still moving with the careful dignity of a man who has not yet decided what this moment is. He said, "Patricia says there's an issue with the disbursement." I said, "There's no issue with the contract." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "What did you do?" I said, "I read the messages, Dad." The air between us changed, not dramatically. The way pressure changes in a room when a window is opened, gradual, total, irreversible. My mother had appeared. She had crossed the room with the quiet speed of a woman who has spent 60 years managing the temperature of other people's situations. She sat next to my father, and she looked at me, and the warmth in her face was still present, but it had retracted, like a tide. She said, "Claire, whatever you heard." I looked at her steadily. I said, "I have the vendor contract. I am the co-signatory. That is not going to change tonight." She started to say something. I held up one hand, not aggressively, just finally. I said, "I made a call to Patricia at 7:15. The transfer holds until I release it." My father said, "This is your sister's wedding." I looked at him. I did not say anything about what he had said at the toast. I did not say anything about 11 months. I did not say anything about $14,500 sent in 4 years and $0 returned. I did not deliver the speech that was available to me in complete, accurate, documented detail. I said, "When Brianna is ready to talk, just her and me, I will release the transfer." I picked up my blazer. I took my moleskine from the pocket, and I held it in my right hand the way I always do at the end of an event. I said, "I also want to tell you that I saved you $22,000 on this wedding by calling in professional favors. I didn't tell you because you didn't ask, but I want you to know, because I want you to know exactly what you have been working with." My mother's mouth opened. I stood up. I said, "Good night, the wedding is beautiful." I walked out. My car was parked in the 3rd row. A dark blue Volvo that I bought myself with the first real money I made as a director. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine off and the window down, and the June air came in carrying the last of the white oak trees along the drive. I opened my moleskine. I looked at the page from the night before. "You are going to observe. You are not going to rescue." I had done exactly that. I opened my phone. I found the family group chat, the main one, the one that included all of us, the one that had been silent for 11 months before suddenly reviving in April when the wedding planning began. I left it. No message, no explanation. The notification would simply say that Claire Ostrowski had left, which is a complete sentence on its own. I found my father's contact. I did not block it. I set it to do not disturb, which is a different thing. It means I will see when he calls. I will simply choose when to respond. I sat in the car for 6 minutes. The venue behind me was still lit and the music was still running, a slow song. And through the window I could see the shapes of people moving inside. And it looked, from the parking lot, the way weddings always look from the outside. Warm and whole and simple, which is the most efficient lie an event can tell. I started the car. I drove home in a silence that was entirely mine. Brianna called me at 11:47 p.m. that same night, not my parents. Brianna. She called from Gary's phone, which told me something about the state of the evening that I did not need confirmed. She cried genuinely, I believe, and she said she had not known the full plan, which is the statement I chose to neither accept nor dispute at that moment because I was still within 24 hours of the event, and I have learned not to process invoices in the same week they arrive. I said, "I'll call you next week." I called her 11 days later. We spoke for 1 hour and 40 minutes, which is the longest phone call we had had in 4 years. I did not ask her what she knew. I told her what I had heard and what I had done and what I was no longer willing to be. She cried again. She said she was sorry. She said sorry in the specific way that means I am sorry for what happened and I am also sorry for my own part in it, which are different sorries, and she gave me both of them without me asking. I released the transfer the following morning. The $4,200 in collected gifts went to Brianna's honeymoon fund, exactly as intended, because it was always about Brianna. It was never about destroying the evening. It was about demonstrating that I was not the person they believed they were dealing with. My father called 8 days after the wedding. He did not apologize. He explained that the plan had been mischaracterized, and that he had always intended to pay me back for the wedding support, which is a sentence I wrote down verbatim in my Moleskine, and which I will keep there for the rest of my life as a record of how revision works in real time. I listened to him completely. Then I said, I would be happy to help with anything going forward if we can have an honest conversation first. I know a financial counselor who works with families in exactly this kind of situation. I would pay for the first 3 sessions. He said he would think about it. He has not called back. My mother sent an email 2 weeks after the wedding. It was 4 paragraphs. The first 3 were about how the wedding had turned out beautifully and how Marcus's flowers had been exceptional. The 4th paragraph began, I know there are things that need to be addressed between us. I replied, I agree. I'm ready when you are. The offer stands, not because I am waiting, because I have done every generous thing I am capable of doing, and generosity that is not received is not wasted. It is simply logged and released. Marcus Webb emailed me in July. He wanted to know if Harlow Collective needed a preferred florist for our fall event calendar. I wrote back the same day. We are now on our 3rd contracted event together. I want to speak directly to you for a moment. Not about my family, about yours. If you have been the one who sends the money without being asked where your month is going. If you have been the one introduced as the footnote at the event you helped make possible. If you have been the one whose expertise was borrowed and whose name was quietly removed from the credit. If you have been the family bank that everyone deposits into and no one asks about, I want you to hear this clearly. The most expensive thing you can buy is other people's comfort with your silence. Every year you stay silent costs you something that cannot be invoiced, not the money, though the money is real and documented and specific. The cost is the version of yourself that keeps believing, against all available evidence, that love without accountability is still love. It is not. It is a performance of love maintained by your willingness not to audit it. Your expertise is not a favor you owe anyone. The knowledge you built, whatever field, whatever discipline, whatever 7 years of early mornings and contract negotiations and health inspector conversations, made you into the person you are. That is yours. It belongs to you. It is not a family resource to be accessed when convenient and ignored when you need something in return. You are allowed to put your name on the contract. You are allowed to know exactly what you are signing. You are allowed to stand up from the table before the collapse is complete, because you do not owe anyone a front row seat to your own clarity. And the person who recognizes you, Marcus Webb in a green apron, your colleague Dana across a conference table, the one person in the room who reads the quality of your work and knows immediately who you are, that person exists. They are in the building. They will find you when you stop hiding what you do. I drove home from Thornwood Estate in June, and I sat in my apartment, and I made a cup of tea, and I opened my Moleskine to the page where I had written the rule the night before, and I read it one more time, and I closed it. You are going to observe. You are not going to rescue. That is the rule, not because they don't deserve help, but because help that is extracted is not help. It is taxation with a family's face on it. Real help is offered on terms that include your dignity. It can be declined. It can be accepted. It cannot be assumed. If you have been the one assumed upon, I see you. The peace on the other side of that dinner is different from any silence you have sat in before. It belongs to you entirely. If you have ever done your best work for people who called it food service, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below. I read everyone. Your expertise is yours, so is your peace.